There you go. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully that everyone can see that okay. Let's see. All right. Jackie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jackie Wellington. I am one of the partners with Community and Economic Development Solutions, and we serve as programmatic staff for the St. Louis County Port Authority.
Yep. And I'm Beth
And
Noonan, and also a member of Community and Economic Development Solutions. So welcome to our public information session number 2. So thank you for joining us. Just by way of background, we'll sort of be going through the entire application as we go through the slideshow. But to give you a little bit of background on the Community Investment Fund, it was originally created in 2010. It is funded by rental payments to the Port Authority through a ground lease with River City Casino. So these are public funds, but they are not taxpayer dollars that are used for this. And the goal here was to create a fund to reinvest in the St. Louis community, originally focusing in and around the Lee May area, but now in the most recent iteration, last several years, available for investment throughout St. Louis County.
right.
The Port Board is actually comprised of 7 members that align with the different council districts. And the Grants Committee is the main group comprised of 3 of those members, Port Board members, who review the applications and then ultimately make recommendations to the full board on funding decisions. So all of your applications, if you submit them, will be reviewed by the 3 and then will ultimately go for approval to a full board meeting. Our areas of focus, and Jackie will get into some more detail about sort of the priorities, but the grants really are for projects and programs that will promote economic and community development in St. Louis County. The Port Authority is an economic development entity, and so that is their focus. So from our perspective, and these definitions are included, I believe, in the FAQ, but economic development really is development and growth, and the idea of retaining long-term retention of businesses and employment opportunities that help to build wealth, create jobs, and improve quality of life for St. Louis residents. Community development is a sort of component part of economic development. And really, it sustains and supports economic development by making sure that local communities have the resources and conditions necessary to benefit from large-scale initiatives. So it could be a large range of activities that help to build community and human capacity. So they're often undertaken by nonprofits. So we see community development as being sort of a supportive and component of economic development. In terms of eligibility, the only entities that are eligible to receive grant funding through the Community Investment Fund program are nonprofits with 501c3 status, which is nonprofit as defined by the IRS, and we do expect that you'll have an IRS ruling letter. It does not include municipality. It does not include private for-profit businesses. Eligibility also rests in projects that are in St. Louis County and or primarily serve St. Louis County residents. So for example, we have had organizations that have received funding that are located in the city of St. Louis, but the component of the program that they're creating is actually serving St. Louis County businesses, residents. So it's really, there has to be a nexus between the funding that is provided and providing benefit to St. Louis County because it is the St. Louis County Port Authority. It is a county port authority dollars that are generated in St. Louis County. So they really have to be reinvested in the community or in programs that support the community. Funding is available for not only programs, but also capital projects. So unlike a lot of organizations that provide funding, the Port Authority does actually provide funding not only for the programs, but also for, construction, redevelopment, could be design plans, these kinds of planning activities. All of those are covered under the sort of umbrella of port funding. And again, you'll have this in recorded, but we'll also have this available. Some of these questions are answered in the FAQ, so I do encourage you all to take a look at those as well.
Within the community and economic development framework, the Port Authority has identified basically 5 funding priorities for utilization of these funds that they are going to make available to the community. I'm going to briefly go through these, provide some illustrative examples of some of them. They're not exhaustive. There are projects that probably aren't going to be listed here that you may have that are potentially eligible for the funding. The first priority that they've established is, once again, business retention and expansion. As an economic development organization, the goal is to create and grow businesses in the community. Within that framework, there have been projects that have been funded that provide loan products or provide funds that fill gaps where available capital is not available. Workforce development programs, specifically programs that are created to address a shortage in workers for jobs that are currently in demand. We don't want to focus on jobs that where no one is hiring right now. So it has to be something that we know that there are openings and there's availability for people to obtain those jobs. And then the third area underneath there is expansion into international markets for local businesses. So if businesses want to expand outside of the continental US to try to sell their products somewhere else, that is something that's also available. The second priority is neighborhood economic and community development. And this is probably where a lot of you guys will fit in if you're in a neighborhood-based organization. The primary priority is investment and stabilization of communities. And within that, the first thing that we look at is repositioning vacant and underutilized properties. We have a notation here that these are oftentimes retail sites that are no longer being used, that different neighborhood organizations are looking at repurposing for some other use that would support and benefit the community. Doesn't have to be retail. It could be any other kind of strip shopping malls, those kinds of things. Neighborhood infrastructure improvements, those are potentially eligible primarily if it's something like doing a new parking lot, providing lighting, things like that. But typically those would be part of a much larger project that someone is doing. If you're building a new building or expanding a building and you need to provide some infrastructure, that's what would fall within this category here. The port also has looked favorably on planning and feasibility studies. Community planning and organization or some other things that would go along with the planning and feasibility studies. If you want to do a community plan to help you develop a strategy for looking at disinvested property, that's where you could potentially also get some funding for a planning study. And then generally speaking, neighborhood stabilization. And things that would fall under that would be property maintenance programs, specifically something where you've got existing, for example, low-income elderly homeowners that aren't able to keep their properties up to code, to provide some resources for them to be able to improve their homes so that they become decent, safe, and sanitary for them to continue to live in. The third priority is entrepreneurship programs. Once again, this goes along with the economic development framework for the Port Authority in terms of supporting businesses. Their focus has primarily been on underserved businesses and under businesses that are located in underserved neighborhoods. So any kind of program that would support small business development, be it providing loan products, providing services so that you can strengthen and expand those businesses would potentially be eligible under this priority. And then the other thing is there are a number of innovation ecosystems within the St. Louis region, biosciences, ag tech, security, all of those kinds of things, or also within the ecosystems that we have here that are currently developing rather. So some of the things like technical assistance, financing, facilities, those kinds of things would be eligible under that one. Under real estate redevelopment and development, that's pretty self-explanatory. Anything associated with like brownfield redevelopment projects. We don't necessarily fund the actual environmental remediation, but if it's a project that's in those areas, that would be something that would be potentially eligible. Site acquisition and assemblage. If you have a property and you're in the process of assembling a site in order to build another facility on that particular location, that's potentially eligible. And then pre-development costs or site development, site preparation costs, which would be architectural engineering costs, demolition costs, other types of infrastructure costs. Those kinds of things would potentially also be eligible with that. And the fifth and the last one is basically focused on targeted industry sector support. And this is based on any kind of a plan that has a county or a regional priority to it. So once again, like I mentioned earlier with the innovation sector, ag sciences and technology, the life sciences, cybersecurity, and advanced manufacturing. So anything that falls within those categories that are helping to expand employment opportunities in those areas would also be potentially eligible with that. So the port prioritizes, as I mentioned earlier, programs and or projects that increase economic opportunity for historically underserved individuals and or benefits underserved and economically distressed communities. So we're looking to go into those areas where they have not had significant investment from other vehicles that are out here to try to at least invest in those areas and to strengthen those communities. We have established a schedule for the grant project for this go around. The application was initially released on May 29th of this year. We have a due date of no later than 11:59 p.m. on July 10th of this year. And if the application is not received prior to that time, it will not be reviewed by the committee. Once those applications are received, we will review those applications with the grants committee, the three-person committee that Beth mentioned. We will follow up with each of the proponents if there are questions posed by the review committee, and then we will do an evaluation in late summer and fall. All of this entire schedule is totally dependent on the number of grant applications we receive. As we mentioned, we have a three-person committee. They will have to read all of those and evaluate them and make decisions about them before they go to the full port board for final approval. And we anticipate having those final funding decisions in late 2025.
One thing I did want to mention is that if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will open up for questions later, and we may, pause if there's something critical. Do ask general questions, if we're not in a position to answer specific questions about your particular organization during this particular meeting, but we do have, you can submit questions to us directly later. But if you do have general questions about the application that you think would be helpful for everyone to hear, please feel free to put them in the chat. So in terms of the application, there's really two parts to it. First is the general application. Everybody, no matter whether you're applying for programmatic funding, you're applying for redevelopment or construction funding, you have to fill out the general application. And there's several required attachments that we'll go over, but that should be included in that application. Then really Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 are actually the sort of budget related documents. And so if you are submitting an application for funding for a construction or capital project, you will only use Appendix 1. If you are applying for programmatic funding, you will only fill out Appendix 2. So, we always get this. There is no similar program for for-profit organizations. This is exclusively, I'm just going, there's in the chat a couple questions. It is not for, it's for 501c3s only. Are you able to submit both Appendix 1 and Appendix 2? You may do that, but I will say this, it is very confusing for the Port Authority to consider funding for a project when it is both programmatic as well as construction. Because what we find is that if it's a construction project, you may not be ready to do the programming.
Right.
Or so why would we be providing you with programming funding if you don't have the facility, the renovation, whatever? And then if they're completely discrete projects, then you're actually competing with yourself. So I would seriously I would consider prioritizing your projects. All right, we'll go ahead and
Beth, there's a question about the procurement rules and compliance requirements.
Yes.
For those,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that for those folks that are awarded funds, we have a session that they are required to attend where we go through all of the procurement requirements. The port does not reimburse for work that was done prior to being awarded funds.
Mm-hmm. And so there are compliance, there are procurement requirements, and the procurement requirements are the same that are applicable to the Port Authority.
Right.
Now, there may be, at some point that may be reconsidered, but as things currently stand right now, you're subject to the Port Authority's public procurement requirements. And then you said, what considerations do you have for single versus multi-year funding? Typically, and this is also in the FAQ, the Port Authority funds for 12 months to 2 years. So it's typically up to 24 months. Again, the Port Authority is considering, what may be alternatives, but currently at this point in time, the most you can get is a 2-year funding commitment. All right. Just general application. The initial thing is just basically what you normally would expect to have on your in an application. It's name, contact information, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we do ask if you are a not-for-profit organization. That's really an important thing that you have your 501c3 designation. We are also interested in understanding whether or not your organization is a minority or women-controlled organization. This is just for our data. That by definition, the way we define it is either over 50% of the board members are either minorities or women. Next page, we have sort of, again, some basic information. timing, budget, how much you're actually requesting from the port, what your total project costs are, where you're located. Again, as we mentioned before, it's really important that we understand who you're serving and where you're serving. So if it's something that's generally the entire county council, it's the entire St. Louis County, just put in all districts. If it's just focused on sort of a North County area, then you put in the relevant districts there. So you're not limited to one district. We just want to get an idea of where you're going to, what communities you're going to be serving, and it can be the entire St. Louis County community. A little bit of an addition and a change that we haven't had in the past is we do ask you, Jackie ran through the strategic priority, the community investment fund priority areas. We do ask that you identify which funding priority or priorities, it could be more than one, that you believe that your project falls under. Takes the guesswork out for us, and those definitions and examples that Jackie ran through are included in an appendix to the application. So you'll have those all there so you can figure out which is the best one that you fall under. Again, as I mentioned, here we have business retention and expansion, neighborhood economic development, entrepreneurship, real estate, and targeted industry support. And again, this is the exact kinds of information that Jackie just went over. And it's included in the application. Again, we really want to understand, and I think it's really helpful for our board members who are reviewing these applications that we understand very succinctly what it is that you're asking for funding for. We want it in a short, sort of relatively succinct description. And if it's an entrepreneurship, this is your sort of elevator pitch. That's kind of what you should consider, sort of the one that's going to sell us in summary what you're doing and what your impact is. Somebody said, is FAQ document, they do not see it on the website. It should be on the website. I will take a look and see where it is when Jackie is reviewing, but I believe it is on the website. So Jackie, let you go.
Also included in the general application is a section we call mission and project details. And what we're trying to accomplish with this is to understand your organization. We're asking for background information in terms of your mission to make sure that the project that you're proposing aligns with that mission. We also want to know what it is that you do as an organization so that we can make sure that what you're proposing to do aligns with what your organization's capabilities are. And then we also want to know who it is that you're going to be serving. Who's your clientele that you're going to be providing services to? And then we also need to understand your organizational capacity. Do you have people on staff, or will you be looking to retain people on staff in order to be able to accomplish the program that you're seeking funding for? We're also looking for a lot of detail about the project that you're looking to implement. What we're looking for with that project description is what is the need that you're trying to address and who will be served as you address that specific need. So if you're focused on home repair for senior citizens, that's your clientele. What is the need associated with that? Also, how does it fit in with your organization's overall strategy? Is this what your organization typically does, or is this an expansion or a new avenue that you want to explore or something like that? But we need to understand that project and all of the particulars about it, particularly if there are partners that you'll be working with. Who are those partners? So in addition to who you're going to be served, we want to know who you're going to be working with. And then we also want to make sure that the projects that are funded through the port are also consistent with existing community neighborhood plans and that they're going to advance those plans and provide additional support and benefit to whatever those particular initiatives are. Also, on the general application, we're looking for outcomes and sustainability. We want to know, once you implement your program, what are going to be the outcomes from that? We need to know what those outcomes are. We need those quantified. So if you're planning on doing a training program, how many people are you planning on training? That's the kind of numeric outcomes we're looking for. If there are additional investments that will be made, because typically the port funds or like gap funding for a project that you're wanting to do, but you already have some funding in order to implement the project. And then we also want to know, how are you going to track your progress? Once you get started, how are you going to keep track of who you serve, what those outcomes are, and to make sure that all of that information is captured because it will be required to be submitted to the port. The other item that I'll mention is the port funding. One of the appendix requires a port budget, a project budget. This is a budget specifically for the project that you're seeking funding for, not your whole organization's budget, but the budget for the project. And if the project is funded, what we also want to know is, once the port funds are expended and the project is established, how are you going to sustain it over time? Where additional resources are going to come from in order to sustain the program once the initial funding is utilized? And one of the things that we wanted to mention is that in-kind contributions can be included in your port budget, in your project budget, as part of one of the sources for of funding to cover the cost of implementation of the program. The other section that we have is basically just the legal stuff. They're just assurances and certifications that are required. We want to know if there's any outstanding litigation or if you anticipate any litigation against your organization. We also, as Beth mentioned, MBE, WBE utilization. We do encourage you to use minority and women-owned businesses as part of the project that you're proposing to do. And then the other element that you'll be required to certify is that you use the E-Verify system. And that is the system that illegal aliens that are seeking employment, you have to get certification for them. We also have, in the last part of the application, a checklist that we've created so that as you go through and complete your documents, you can refer back to the checklist to make sure that all of those documents that are required have been included in the packet that you submit to the port. So once again, we need your board member information. We need your IRS 501c3 determination letter, letters of support, and we don't need a lot of letters of support, just key letters of support to support what you're proposing to do. We need your financial statements. The preference is for audited statements, but if you don't have them, because a lot of nonprofits, especially the smaller nonprofits, don't, so we will look at what alternative information you can provide us for that. And then once again, in addition to the general application, you will probably submit Appendix 1 if it is a construction or a capital investment project, or Appendix 2 if it's for programmatic services.
Just going back to the question about the FAQ, it is on the website underneath where it says the June 7th, underneath the click to register for the second information session. It says, in addition, please see our answers to frequently asked questions. So there's a little link in there. So again, sort of going through the appendices and the information that is included in there. for Appendix 1, which covers redevelopment projects, could be new construction, could be renovation, something else. What we are looking for again is, the basic information. So we have reference to it, name of project, how much you've requested, and what you plan to use your funds on. We want a project schedule. So it identifies, property acquisition, any kind of approvals. And we understand that some of this is projected, but this is what you anticipate as your project milestone activities. Goes through and, when you're going to do site prep, completion, commencement of construction, completion of construction, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking for a schedule. And then we actually do call out sort of the detailed project costs for each component of a project. And some of it may not be applicable. If it's not applicable, you can put NA. But your land costs, building costs, any kind of equipment, any sort of infrastructure, the construction costs, whether they are new construction or rehab, and then the soft costs, which are usually your A&E architectures and your design fees, legal, any kind of financing, etc. So those are items that we would like you to specifically address in Appendix 1 if you're doing a construction project. In addition to the uses of the fund, we really want to know what all the sources are. Usually, if you're doing a construction project, it's a pretty significant amount of money. We want to understand where the rest of it is. When Jackie mentioned, typically the port's funding is going to be part of a larger group of funding. It certainly is almost always the case in a project like that involves construction. So sources of funding could include equity, it could be any loans, grants, and other kinds of funding. So tax credits, you may have new markets that you're planning on using or hope to have. And then we want to understand whether it has been approved or committed. So we want to understand what the real deal is, what your real budget is. One difference is if you're doing, for example, a planning project where you are looking for funding for that falls into this, and you may not know whether or not that the plan may be to figure out whether or not you're going to do something. We don't need to worry about all this kind of stuff, but that would probably fall under this particular area. So in addition to understanding what the actual commitments are, we do kind of give you a last sort of like, give us what else we need to understand about this appendix. We know this is a fairly limited, and there may be some things that you need to address more specifically. And so we give you an opportunity to provide additional information for clarity's sake for any of these answers or responses. With Appendix 2, again, this is for this would be submitted for a programmatic request. Again, we've got the basic information, the amount of funds, who you are, what the project is, how much you're asking, and what the total project is, budget is. We're looking for you to attach rather than be specific about what could be in a programmatic budget. We want you to provide that for us because there could be a variety of things. It could be, staffing. It could be a portion of staffing, travel, computers. It could be a lot of different, and there could be services, the kinds of services that you're providing. It could be somebody who's an independent contractor that you're going to be hiring. There's so many different options. If you're doing programmatic, we do want you to go ahead and attach a budget that you've prepared yourself with both the sources of funding that you will be using, including the port funds, and then what you're going to be using those on. And we do here want you to have a detailed description of the new services and the costs of any new services, if it's relevant. And then if you're going to be hiring anybody or if you're going to be using outside consultants, we'd like to understand that as well. And you may be doing both. It may be supporting both.
Okay, I'm going to provide you with just a couple of examples of projects that the port has funded in the past to give you an idea of the kinds of things that they'll be looking for. This is a project that was located in the city of Pagedale in the 24-1 community that was undertaken by Beyond Housing. It was a construction, they were constructing the building that you see on the top photograph, And within that building, they wanted to create a commercial kitchen for a training program that they wanted to implement. They had working with them a university, they had a food service provider that the university was going to use their graduates, the food service provider were going to use their graduate. So they had a complete uh, hiring system, if you will, built into their training people and them going into jobs where there were employment opportunities that were available. This particular project, it was roughly a 4,500 square foot commercial kitchen that was done, and then it fell within the business retention and expansion uh, priority because it was for workforce development. And they had a seamless system where they were training people and they had employers already lined up so that folks would go seamlessly over into employment opportunities. The second project is one that we funded several times, which was Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. They provided staffing and programmatic support to expand their micro enterprise program, which provided free legal and educational services for minority and women-owned entrepreneurs in North St. Louis County. The chart below basically shows how they quantified and provided us with information about their outcomes, who they served, and the kind of services that they have provided. This one fell into the entrepreneurship and innovation category. The last one is the Spanish Lake Community Development Corp. This was a project where it was a community organization that wanted to look at creating a town center, and they needed to do a feasibility study as part of a planning effort to determine whether or not that particular site would be appropriate for what they wanted to do. So in order to accomplish this, the Port Authority provided them for funding to do their community engagement and their planning study in order to evaluate the efficacy of trying to create this town center on the Bellefontaine corridor in North County. This one fell within the neighborhood economic and community development priority. So these are just some examples of the kinds of projects that have been submitted that the port has funded in the past.
So just a couple of final things. The FAQ is available on the webpage. I think I did mention where it is. If you have other questions that are not addressed by the FAQ, please feel free to email me directly at bnoonan@ced-solutions.com. Again, this information will be available, and actually my email address is, I believe, also on the website. It should be underneath the frequently asked questions link. Again, importantly, deadline is 11:59 p.m. on July 10th, 2025. So we appreciate your time and attention. We've got a few more questions. Again, would case management connecting clients to job training and or employment support count as economic or community development? My initial initial impression is probably. But I would suggest if you want to provide some additional details, I think the thing is that if you can make the argument and explain what you're providing, it will be considered. It's hard to sort of say specifically, and we don't want to discourage anyone from applying. Now, if you're a for-profit company organization, don't apply. There are some clear-cut ones, but when it comes to sort of supportive services for people trying to get jobs or employment, it's possible. But I don't know enough about your organization to give you a specific answer. But I don't want to discourage you from applying. Oh, got a big long one here. Let me see here. What are the reporting requirements for this funding? We do have quarterly reporting requirements. So it's quarterly reporting, and then at the end of the grant term, we do ask for a final report. If it is a construction project, we typically ask for 3 years of additional annual reporting. So, there's not a lot to report in construction, and the actual economic and community impact is going to occur after the and after something is constructed. So we really want to understand what happens after the fact. So typically we will ask for another 3 years, but it's just an annual reporting requirement after that. So not too burdensome, I don't think. Um, can this fund existing staff or only no? It can fund existing staff. The Port Authority is not focused in on offsetting your general operating costs. So, we do allow a certain amount for administrative fees, but the goal here is not to sort of just support nonprofits doing the same thing that they have been doing. The port typically likes to focus on something where you're trying to expand an existing program or launch something new. So you can't, if you've got staff committed to it and it's a portion of your staff's time, that's fine. It doesn't have to be new staff. Um, uh, you know what? I think this other question, I'm going to say, I think it's probably something that would be eligible about a pilot program about case management. It's something that I think, if I'm understanding it correctly in this quick review, I think it is something that is potentially fundable. I can't guarantee anything, but if it's, it, if it's preparing them for in employment and that kind of thing, I think it's possible. The port is not looking to support social services
Correct.
exclusively. And so, um, you know, and the closer it gets to what we would consider sort of a social services programming, the harder it gets for them. But for example, they have supported funding for people who are
Worker reentry.
yeah, so worker reentry programs for people who have had been just involved with the justice system. That is something that, providing those supports, and then that includes sort of employment and preparation for employment, is something that has been funded in the past. But it gets a little bit harder sometimes if it's really not got a clear connection. If we have applied before, are we required to create a new account before we click on the link to submit the application? I don't know that you can, I don't know that you're creating yes, you are, because you're uploading your application. So there's not really a registration. I think there's some clear information about how you upload your application. If you have specific questions, we have one of our colleagues is helping with the application materials. So there is no real like registration. We need you to upload it. It's a little bit different than this year. It was where you just submitted into a portal. We'd had some issues with that. So right now we're allowing people to upload their applications directly to a Dropbox folder. Um, do you fund projects that have been previously funded?
If it's an expansion,
Yeah, sometimes. I
but
mean,
if it's the
again,
same project, that kind of falls into just your basic operations.
yeah, it gets a little harder.
Yeah.
It gets a little harder for them. Um,
And is requesting funding to maintain operational levels in light of federal funding cuts and eligible pitch.
that's that we are struggling a little bit with those kinds of questions. I don't know I do not know how the board and the grants committee will receive that.
Right.
That's it's an up in the air question. I think all of the grants committee is cognizant of the impact and the need to support folks. The question though is that if it's operational, is it really a new or an expansion? Or,
Yeah.
it gets a little bit, I mean, that's a really hard question for us to answer. It really is.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so if awarded, can funds be dispersed in advance or reimbursement only? Pretty typically it is only reimbursement. That being said, the grant agreement does provide for the grantees to request a certain amount of funding that that they can utilize within a 30-day period and then demonstrate retroactively, but you cannot draw down the entire amount of your grant funding. It's typically reimbursement. Okay. I wish I had a better answer. We had better answers to the situation. We know that you guys are all probably challenged right now in
yeah.
terms of your current funding. Um,
And that's something that we can have a conversation with the grant committee and to see what their reaction is, because this is new. Uh,
yeah,
and historically, they've not had to grapple with those kinds of situations that we currently find ourselves in. But we will make a note of that and have that discussion and see what their reaction is.
yeah, yep. So we don't want to discourage you from applying. I know this is time and resources though that you put into that. Um, but we probably can't give you a guarantee either way. But we will definitely, if you do apply, that it will be a conversation that we will talk about with the grants committee. So, I don't see any other questions, but thank you all so much. This will be posted and, good luck. We look forward to receiving applications from you all and take care and have a good rest of your day.